After years of relentless harassment, audacity, and overreach by Karen and the HOA, I finally made the decision to refuse their repeated demands to sell my ranch. This wasn't merely about property, it was about principle, ownership, and asserting authority over what was legally and rightfully mine. The ranch had been in my family for generations, and no amount of intimidation, legal loopholes, or threats could coerce me into surrendering it. Karen, predictably, did not take my refusal lightly. Within hours of receiving my firm response, she called 911, claiming that I was harboring illegal activity, blocking community access, and posing a threat to neighborhood safety. She intended to provoke law enforcement into intervening against me and force a confrontation that would pressure me into capitulation. The audacity of assuming that a simple 911 call could override legal ownership and decades of meticulous documentation was staggering, but I was prepared. What Karen did not anticipate was my son's unique position. By coincidence, or perhaps divine foresight, he was on duty that day as a police officer for the very jurisdiction covering the area in question. When Karen's 911 call came in, her voice dripping with entitlement, my son received it as the dispatcher. He immediately recognized both the property and the caller, having been fully briefed on all prior conflicts and legal status of my holdings. Karen began her usual tirade, detailing perceived violations, property disputes, and her imagined emergencies. She had no idea that the call was being received by someone with the authority, legal knowledge, and personal investment to assess the situation fully and respond decisively. My son maintained a professional tone while gathering key details, confirming addresses, ownership, and any applicable law. Within minutes, it became clear that Karen's report was baseless. Meanwhile, I observed the unfolding situation remotely. Drone feeds, security cameras, and live communication channels allowed me to witness the HOA's frantic attempts to escalate the situation. Karen, unaware that the dispatcher was my son, continued to misrepresent events, attempting to cast me as a threat. The irony was exquisite. Her own actions, fraudulent claims, harassment, and attempts to manipulate law enforcement were being recorded in real time by the very family I had prepared to defend the property. As the conversation progressed, my son calmly explained the legal facts to Karen. I am the lawful owner of the property. The HOA has no authority to demand a sale. No laws are being violated on my ranch, and her claims of threats or obstruction were entirely unfounded. He documented everything in the official police report, ensuring that any future attempt to manipulate law enforcement or make false claims would be fully accountable in writing. Karen's voice shifted from confident aggression to frantic disbelief, as she realized that the system she hoped to manipulate was not only impartial, but fully aware of her transgressions. While the HOA continued to flail in panic, my son advised them to leave the property immediately to avoid trespassing charges. Any further attempt to harass or manipulate the situation would be met with immediate enforcement. The security team I had in place monitored every perimeter and access point, drones hovering silently overhead, cameras capturing every movement, and ranger patrolling the grounds, providing both a physical and psychological deterrent. Karen and her associates, desperate and confused, began retreating from the property, muttering threats that had no legal basis and documenting their own defeat in real time, unknowingly leaving evidence of trespass, intimidation, and harassment on file. The humiliation was complete. Her attempt to coerce a sale through manipulation of law enforcement had backfired spectacularly, resulting in documentation of her repeated audacity, all under the watchful eye of my son, the officer who knew the full context. By the end of the day, the ranch was secure, the HOA had been humiliated, and legal precedents had been reinforced. Ownership is law, audacity carries consequences, and preparation is power. Karen had learned, once again, that no amount of entitlement or misrepresentation could overcome decades of strategic planning, legal authority, and familial enforcement. Reflecting on the incident, I realized this moment encapsulated a broader lesson. Over the years, the HOA's audacity had escalated from minor intrusions to full-scale attempts at coercion. Yet, each escalation had been met with preparation, documentation, and decisive action. From fence disputes to lakeside conflicts, G-Wagon thefts, and house occupations, I had learned that the combination of legal authority, strategic leverage, and timely intervention, especially when family was involved, was more powerful than any attempt at intimidation. Standing on the porch of my ranch, watching ranger patrol the fields and drones hover silently over the property, I understood that authority had been reaffirmed. Karen and the HOA could attempt to manipulate, intimidate, or misrepresent events, but any audacious act would now be met with immediate, enforceable consequences. My son's presence in law enforcement had turned what might have been a routine harassment call into a demonstration of strategic, legal, and familial dominance. The message was clear. This ranch was mine, my rights were unassailable, and audacity without understanding the full picture carried consequences no one in the HOA could escape.